The event unfolded in the laundry room. The dryer hummed softly behind me, its rhythmic rumble vibrating through the wall with each turn of the drum. The light above us flickered weakly, its glow barely illuminating the edge of the counter, the pale fold of towels I had neglected to stow, and him, Mark, his hand slipped beneath my shirt, catching me off guard before I even registered how near he had come. My back brushed against the machine, not with force, but just enough to snap me into the present. His lips had found their way to my neck. His breath emanated warmth. So was mine. I did not reject him. I remained utterly unperturbed. My hands rested against his chest. The rhythm of his heartbeat resonated against the gentle fabric of his t-shirt. His body pressed against mine in subtle, deliberate movements, as if he were intimately aware of the areas of me that had remained untouched for years. Breathing felt like an impossible task. This was not meant to be something I enjoyed. His hands glided downwards, finally finding their place at my hips. My legs quivered with anticipation as he advanced with a slow, deliberate pace. I found myself clutching the edge of the dryer, struggling to maintain my balance. A thud resonated in my chest, a sensation long forgotten now stirring after years of silence. I recognized the silhouette of his shoulders from our summer cookouts. I had observed the manner in which he grasped his daughter's backpack, the way he absent-mindedly tended to the dirt beneath his nails. I recognized him as her spouse, my closest companion, the gentleman who assisted in repairing my door last spring during her visit to her mother's, the man with whom I shared dinner tables. Yet in that fleeting instant he bore no marital ties. He found himself in peril. I found myself lost in thought, oblivious to the moment. It was not harsh. It lacked sweetness. It lingered in the air, yearning for silence. Two individuals at long last engaging in the very act they once vowed to never entertain. I was trembling uncontrollably, not due to any wrongdoing, yet it lacked the sense of wrongdoing that one might expect. I hadn't anticipated that I would begin to speak, my voice thin and barely a whisper. "I understand," he remarked. He continued to move without pause. His lips lingered near my ear. I sensed his hesitation, the breath stalling in his lungs. Yet he continued to move at a slower pace, as if prolonging the moment could somehow diminish its peril. My fingers gripped the towel beside me, twisting the fabric into a taut coil. And then it came to an end, chaotic and disordered, yet definitive in a manner that stirred an urge to cry out. He recoiled as if a stranger had just entered the room. Yet no one had, not at this moment. Words failed me. My legs seemed unwilling to support my weight. As I raised my gaze to meet his, I found his eyes brimming with an emotion that resembled fear. Perhaps it is merely guilt. I hadn't intended for this to happen. I confessed, my voice trembling like fragile porcelain. Yet I ceased all forms of planning quite some time ago. He remained silent. He casually ran a hand through his hair, then pivoted toward the door. It was then that I caught the faint sound, the gentle jingle of keys echoing through the front hallway. My beloved spouse, residence. I silenced the dryer with a sharp smack that reverberated through the room. The ensuing silence was suffocating. I am 39 years old. I am the proud parent of two boys navigating the halls of high school. I prepare dinner 6 evenings a week and fold underwear that doesn't even belong to me. Mark has reached the age of 35. He entered into matrimony at a tender age. They took up residence next door prior to the arrival of their daughter. My closest companion and his spouse were instrumental in guiding me through the shadows of postpartum depression. I supported her during a miscarriage. We were a unit bound by ties deeper than blood, and then we ceased to be, or perhaps we remained so. Perhaps that is what exacerbates the situation. It was not a bolt from the blue. It was not a mere error born of intoxication. It lacked even the faintest hint of seduction. It was lethargic, years of exchanged glances that never quite settled, hands that lingered with an innocence that vanished under scrutiny. He once retrieved a coffee that had slipped from my grasp. I expressed my gratitude to him. Our fingers grazed against one another. In that moment, I sensed it deeply. I interred it. It returned during another night of inebriation on my porch at 10 p.m., and he arrived with a blanket in hand. It returned with greater intensity when he confided in me softly, as if the admission pained him that he doubted her love for him. Now I remained silent, yet I pondered it. And now we find ourselves at this moment in the laundry room. My marriage unfolds above while my best friend's voice lingers in my phone, tucked away in favorites. I never intended for this to happen. However, I certainly did not intend to convey that either. What actions would you take if the sole individual who brought authenticity to your existence was the very one you were forbidden to long for? For that was the emotion he evoked within me. Authentic. Here it is. I remain present, and I believe that is what I will never forgive myself for. Not the act itself, but the way it made me feel so vibrantly alive. Should you have experienced the passage of years without the warmth of a touch that affirms your existence, you will grasp this sentiment more deeply than you might wish to admit. Show your support and join the community. Certain tales resonate with a subtlety that eclipses even the loudest of cries. The following morning, I prepared coffee as was my customary ritual. Mark had returned to his home, likely preparing breakfast for his daughter, while my husband grumbled through the newspaper as he did every Sunday. All appeared as it should. My children remained in peaceful slumber. The floor groaned in its familiar spots. Yet, a transformation had occurred within me, akin to a fissure that could no longer disguise its existence. I lingered by the sink, cradling the familiar chipped mug that had become a part of my routine, gazing out at the backyard through the window. Their fence stood directly adjacent to ours, the one he assisted in mending during the autumn of last year. Only the two of us driving nails into place amidst a tranquil silence. His arm grazed against mine countless times. I stood my ground, unwavering that ought to have revealed it all to me. Our paths first crossed nearly 8 years prior. Everything appeared to have a distinct essence back then. I still applied lipstick to my lips most mornings. My husband leaned in to give me a tender kiss on the neck as he passed me. I was still enjoying laughing. After that, time passed. It was devoid of aggression of any kind. There was nothing tragic about it, just a lack of depth and a slow fading that seemed like someone gradually changing the color one tone at a time. Mark and Jenna were the ideal couple, young, incredibly supportive, and unassailable in their pursuits. When the battery in my car died, Mark was the one who helped me. Panic struck me in the driveway as my youngest lay there with a broken arm, and Mark moved in to assist me with loading the car. He started to notice me in the middle of it all, not just seeing, but actually feeling. There was a whisper at first. He said, "You're always the first one up," while I dealt with the front plants. When he went outside to get his newspaper, I nodded, spoke a bit, yet I felt a stirring within of me just because someone noticed what was obvious, because someone saw me as more than just extraneous in my own life. He would compliment me on the pie I made for the community event. Without being asked, he would bring in folding chairs. He once discovered me sobbing next to the garbage can, the aftermath of a meal with my spouse still wearing the apron and my makeup smudged, weighed heavy on my heart. He just stood there. I just handed over a bottle of water and made a comment without asking or making any judgments. No need to elaborate. It was the worst of all times. He never looked for anything more than what he already had. He just happened to be there. A woman, especially one who has been invisible in her own kitchen for the past 10 years, reacts profoundly to being seen in this way after a prolonged length of time. My best friend, Jenna, always had a voice that was more appealing, more lovely, and more captivating than mine. A woman who draws attention as soon as she walks into a room. I never wanted to live her life. However, I wished that someone would look at me with the same ferocity as Mark had for her. Then, slowly, he started looking at me that way. I told myself it was only a delusion. I must have been mentally reciting it. His question about your well-being had the same meaning as it would for anyone else. On the inside, though, I knew. I knew. He started to notice the days when he wore that gray hoodie as I started to wait for it to arrive. As I went to get our letters, I couldn't help but wonder if he would be at the mailbox. I started the custom of brushing my hair before going outside. It hurts me to admit that one day I caught him watching me from outside the window. The silky fabric in the guest room told tales of coziness and warmth as I carefully folded the laundry. In the privacy of his garage, he worked diligently on a project. We looked at each other. He kept his eyes on it. Neither did I. 2 months have passed since then. Everything has developed since then in a slow, almost surreal fashion. I feel like I've been held back in time. I held my breath hard. They both glanced at the driveways. Every polite welcome that was a heartbeat too long. And there's no going back now. That moment broke the silence in the laundry room like a piece of glass. Because, in all honesty, I had been waiting for something to break at last. It had been 6 long months since my spouse touched me, and it felt like a lifetime. I stopped looking into the causes of things 2 years ago. Our conversations were like shopping lists. We showed our affection by giving each other tender cheek kisses and paying our bills on time. Previously, I had a soft spot for birthdays. All I can hope is that he forgets about it, saving me from having to put up a front of fake joy. He could have easily fixed it himself when Mark brought the damaged hedge trimmer. He was invited inside by me. He conveyed the sharpness of winter air mixed with the smell of wood smoke. He moved through the house as though he knew every nook and cranny by heart, and I understood that I should have encouraged him to leave. I didn't, however, just because I didn't want him to. I felt full for the first time in years, and the emptiness that had persisted for so long was gone. The dryer's chime signaled that it was finished. I stopped at the laundry room's entrance as I was walking down the hallway. I stared at the spot where it all happened. My fingers touched the well-known edge I had gripped the previous evening. I discovered that I had no regrets. Not right now. There were no tender touches to mark the beginning. First, there were glances, and then those glances started to stay put. Maybe 3 weeks before the laundry room incident, one afternoon, after supper, I found myself cleaning the counter. The kids had climbed to the top floor. My spouse relaxed, falling into sleep on the couch to the sound of the news channel, which had become his nightly ritual. Mark walked in the back door with a small present bag in hand. She stated that it was only a late Jenna had planned to give me a birthday present. He held it out to me, and I thanked him for it. However, my few eyes lingered on the here and now. His lips make words, as I saw. My eyes slid to the faint fold that moved next to his left eye. He exuded the aroma of clean air mixed with cologne, a scent that appeared to last long after it was supposed to. He paused for a second before leaving. I just pressed myself up to the door and asked how I was. I may have replied as I usually do, acceptable, with a restrained smile. But I was hesitant. I conveyed my fatigue, but it's a fatigue that sleep cannot cure. He kept quiet. He only nodded, as though he understood what I was saying. The creaking of the door broke the stillness at that moment. After then, it was the more subtly minutes lurking near the sink while I washed the dishes, sitting little too close as we gathered to submerge ourselves in the movie. His fingertips touched mine as I gave him the remote control. A surprising closeness in such a routine action. I held my ground. I should have, but I didn't. On nay. The house was silent on a specific night last week since everyone had gone to bed early. I shared a bottle of wine with Jenna. Alcohol, and before long, she fell asleep in the recliner's embrace. Mark stayed behind to help clean up. We didn't say anything to one another, just moving through the kitchen in a quiet familiarity, as though this pattern had been ingrained in our lives for a very long time. He hovered uncomfortably close behind me as I knelt to load the dishwasher, unaffected yet close enough for me to feel his breath against the back of my neck, warm and comforting. I didn't move. I got up and turned, and we discovered we were only a few inches apart. He was staring at me intently. It seemed like an unspoken bond, swept between us, not just words, but a cadence of silence. He did not from giving me a kiss, but if he had decided to go forward, I wouldn't have stopped him. The fact that we both knew about it only makes it more agonizing. Looking back, I wondered why I didn't turn away. Let me explain why I didn't say anything. But I think that when someone finally sees you after years of being invisible, it's hard to pretend not to care about desiring anything more profound. Even while that higher sum is inaccurate, even though it conveys a certain amount of risk, I found that I was dedicating myself to remembering the times he came, looking for chances to encounter him. I would wait for him to come outdoors, and then I would have the rubbish has to be taken out immediately. Instead, spend a few minutes reading the mail just to feel that he said, "Hey, oh, how I loathed the weight that question carried for me." It ignited a fire inside me, sending and receiving messages. Nothing is visible. Nothing in this situation is inexplicable. Are there any extras? Are there any batteries available? Has the science project been finished by the kids? At what? What time does Sunday's game start? But there is an unsaid truth hidden beneath every phrase. Hung on. Current flow. There's a challenge ahead. I saw you go one evening. Behind your jacket, he answered. There might need to be a strong argument to come back. For what seemed like forever, I stared at that message. For 5 minutes there was a deep quiet. Read it 5 times. We didn't hear back. However, I decided not to remove it, as well. Everything was on the verge of collapsing on a Tuesday. He came to fix the lock, our screen door. Upstairs, Jenna lay surrounded by her home's peaceful embrace, looking for relief from the pulsing aching in her head by taking a little nap. The kids were gone. My spouse went on a trip for work. Only the two of us were there. I walked up to him holding a glass of lemonade, taking my spot on the porch, arms folded, fighting my own shakes. "Are you all right?" he asked, wiping his forehead and glancing into my way, as though he hadn't meant to look him in the eye for so long. I nodded, but my tone faltered a little. He put down the screwdriver and looked at me as I said, "Yeah, it's just been a long week," observing. "I'm worried about your health," he said. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. I wanted to say something brave, but I only muttered, "Don't." Still, I stood motionless as he came toward me. He stayed away from interaction. However, a part of me yearned for his touch, which made me more afraid than none that I had ever encountered. He broke into my dreams that night, forcing me to wake up. In a fog of perspiration, guilt, and a never-ending want for more. It's easy to declare that until another soul flames, I would never do such an act. The life ignite within of you again, until your body remembers what it felt like being sought after, and then suddenly, it never feels quite like maybe just a one-off instance. And maybe that one incident turns into a persistent query. But what if I never stop? It transpired on a Thursday, a day that passes for ordinary. Jenna arrived at messaged me early in the morning, informing me that her mother was ill and that she would be traveling to Chicago for a stay of one night. At home, Mark found himself alone. There was a tone in her voice, that tinge of concern mixed with distraction. I promised her that I will get in touch with to find out if he needed anything. It wasn't untrue, but it failed to disclose the whole truth as well. I threw myself into the craft of baking that day. Bread with bananas. I hadn't engaged in that activity for a long time. It's just the muscle memory of a life spent obsessing over details. I enclosed, wrapped it in foil, put it in a paper bag, and told myself it was just a gesture of goodwill toward neighbors. By the time I made my way across the yard, the sky had grown dark. The day has not yet arrived. Over yet the dusk calls. There was a heavy wetness in the air, as though it were waiting for the rain to come, but couldn't agree on a time to let go of its weight. I hit the knock after ringing the doorbell. He nearly immediately opened the door. "Hey," he said. His voice carried a note of astonishment, but his face was still satisfied. "Is everything okay?" I lifted the sack. "In the air. I thought you might not have eaten yet, loaf." He grinned. "There you weren't required to follow suit." I admitted what I had said earlier. He stepped to the side with grace. Enter. Shadows hung above the house. One lamp alone in the corner gave the living room a soft glow. There is no television. There is silence. Just calm. With a feeling of uneasiness flooding over me, I set the bread on the counter. Over me as I asked myself why I had come. However, at that very moment, I felt behind me. His presence loomed. Not close, not yet, but close enough close to make me more conscious of the warmth that pervaded the space and the constriction in my chest. "Do you want a coffee or something else, maybe?" he asked, turned, and said no. Then we discovered that we were just standing there, unaffected. The refrigerator's soft hum filled the atmosphere. The kitchen faucet echoes with a steady drip. His breathing changed, slowing down and going deeper. "I should go," I said, but I did not move. He said nothing. I looked up at him, and I thought I saw reflected in his eyes all the unsaid words we had ever harbored. "Are you all yes?" he asked softly. "Negative. I don't know who came up with the original move. It doesn't seem like it has any meaning to me." Our lips met, paused in a moment that shifted between remorse and curiosity. He reached out and touched the side of my face. My cheekbone was lightly touched by his thumb. Soft exercise prudence. I could break or run. I decided not to do either of those things. I gave myself permission to give in to it. Captivated by him, we slammed into the wall of the corridor. His hands discovered there moved smoothly around my back, then to my waist, and then slipped under the hem of my shirt. Human flesh on human flesh. My breath caught, not because I was afraid, but rather because I hadn't been hugged by someone who wanted to genuinely connect with me, not just to scratch my skin. I took a short breath, not born, when his lips touched my neck. Experiencing grief from a different source, longing, remembering, and the agony of exposure. We never quite made it to the bedroom haven. The corridor was obscured by shadows. The lamp tucked up in the corner was the source of the sole illumination, casting shadows that moved in long lines along the walls. He used a gentle touch to guide me. He entered behind me with my hands resting against the door frame, carefully assessing whether I would stop him in his tracks. No, I didn't. I couldn't. As his physique blended with mine, I let out a breath. One I didn't know I had been waiting for what seemed like forever. The tempo started out slowly, before moving deeper into the depths, which are then uneven. Every position had its own particular pain, not just from the strain or the strain, but also from the importance, the intimacy, and the knowledge that went with it. I tightened my hold on the wooden frame in an attempt to gain support. My eyes closed, head bent. It went beyond pleasure. A collapse occurred, the sort that trembles silently. His chest pressed hard into my back as his hand settled on my hip, and I could sense how I muttered his name, causing his breath to falter. Following that, we stood motionless, ensnared in, for what seemed like an age, there was stillness between us. I was quite reluctant to turn around. I was unwilling to face the reality that was in front of me, a reality that I knew all too well. This was not just a simple mistake. A change had taken place, a decision inscribed in stone forever. Finally, he retreated a step. I adjusted my shirt and leaned against the wall, purposefully averting his eyes. He said, "I apologize." I bowed my head, head in agreement. However, I was not at that location. Same here, not silent. I discovered a sense of wholeness in those little moments that had escaped me for a long time. I experienced a sense of being seen, I felt a sense of belonging, and I detested how much I relied on it. As when daylight finally arrived, I was up long before the usual chime of the alarm could wake me. My body ached in an odd, unfamiliar places, but what imprisoned me behind the sheets was the silence. Not exactly guilt, but instead, there would be the emptiness of what I had expected. Without regret, stayed composed, just peaceful. I woke up from my sleep, made a hot cup of coffee, and carefully folded like I always did, the laundry. The house didn't look different. There was no introspection. I didn't see sin. I saw a kind tenderness. The stiffness in my jaw has disappeared, as has the color in my face. I hated the way that feeling came over me. How dangerously easy it was to believe that everything was still the same. But it had. Later in the evening, Jenna went back home. In the kitchen, I heard her speaking to Mark in that recognizable, tired, and slightly irritated tone as it drifted in from outside. When the world weighed heavily on her, she frequently adopted. He kissed her tenderly as he carried her things inside, on her cheek. Her eyes did not meet her lips as they curled into a smile. From my standing at the window, I watched her as she gave her neck a gentle rub, thanked him, and went up the stairs. Mark stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked away, to the rear entrance meeting my gaze. Captured in the moment, we remained still. He nodded once, a small gesture, just a nod of recognition. I avoided my look first. The days that followed were lengthy, instructive, and unstable, much like a tight rope hanging in midair. I thought about the idea that we would simply ignore it, assuming it was just a momentary event. But the practice of pretending only succeeds when both parties are equally skilled at deceit. I wasn't in the supermarket. Instinctively, my hand moved in the direction of the egg carton he had selected. Our fingers passed over each other. I flinched. He didn't just apologize and carried on as like nothing had occurred. I would lie down next as the room grew dark. To my spouse, wondering if he could sense the weight of that guilt, the unquenchable hunger, and the lingering effects on my skin. Yearning the invisible fissure, a knot grew in my throat with every ring of my phone. Stomach, not because he wanted it to be him, but because he wished it wasn't. However, I have confirmed that he didn't send a communication. This was not necessary on his part. The following incident happened a week later. Jenna and I occupied ourselves with folding laundry while we sat in her living room. She left to respond to a give a call. Mark came out of the garage, his brow shining with perspiration from fixing the porch. Illumination. He nodded at me. I nodded back. He reached out behind me, picking up a cleanly folded towel from the pile. All it took was for our arms to brush against one another. Not a single syllable came out of his mouth. Neither did I, but I had no doubt that he would. The next day he came after me, and he did. It developed at a steady pace. It was not passionate. The method was methodical, as though we were trying to memorize things that should be forgotten. He ushered me into my kitchen, while the dog slept soundly and the coffee brewed. Later, I discovered against the counter, I leaned. The cool tile brushed across my bare feet. It wrinkled and crumpled my shirt. After running his fingers through my hair, he said we should stop. I angled my head in recognition. I know, but neither of us moved. On the third. On this instance, things got worse overall. Not because of what we did, but instead, it was the quiet that hung between us. He never asked how I was doing. I didn't say no to him. Our sense of the intrinsic wrongness of it all was acute. We knew we were going to start that travel again, since that's what it means to cross a boundary. For once, you stop seeing it as a line in any way. Initially, I noticed it in delicate details. Every time my focus wavered, Jenna started to ramble on. Are you really focusing on what am I saying? As we sat down in her living room one evening, she posed a query while holding wine glasses. Neither of us watched the show that flickered on the television. As well, my lips formed a quick smile. Indeed, in hurry. Sorry, but I'm just exhausted. For what seemed like an age, she stared at me as if she was searching for something concealed in my looks. She sipped her wine delicately before she turned her eyes back to the TV. However, I noticed a significant shift in her. Comprehension. A silence that had changed from comfort to doubt. There was no message from Mark. There was no call. However, his eyes on me had changed. No longer with passion, but with a feeling of hesitation, with patience. We felt as if we had gone too far below the surface, too deeply. At that time, we discovered that we were all holding our breath when we were suspended in silence. The earlier event transpired surprisingly, and I started to wonder if it would ever happen again. Jenna went to pick up her son from soccer practice one afternoon. Mark prolonged in the garage, preoccupied on fixing something. When I offered him a drink of water, there was only that quiet, engulfed us, but I could feel it hovering in the air between us. The mass of that unbearable strain of all that is unsaid, not of desire. Though the warmth emanating from the garage door frame served as a soft reminder of the sun's embrace. I leaned back against it, torn between the safety of light and the embrace of shadow. He moved forward with measured purpose. He hardly made a sound with his voice. "Are you okay?" I gave a nod. However, I felt a burning sensation in my throat. He took a deep breath. "I'm not sure about way to view you at this moment," I whispered. "Under such circumstances, do not do so." However, I stayed motionless, reaching out with his fingertips brushing mine. In the vast fabric of our common experiences, it was only the smallest brush, inconsequential. However, in some, the anguish was deeper in an unfathomable sense. "Jenna is not stupid," he said quietly. I admit that I once said. Yes, I did. I realized it when Jenna started to extend fewer invitations to me, when she started asking questions that didn't feel like questions. When I saw her looking at for me, it was a feeling of detachment rather than rage. We never actually have to deal with the repercussions, not in the traditional sense. There is nothing but emptiness in front of us, neither conflict nor cries, a cool, purposeful expanse. Mark and I never again saw each other after that, once more in that manner. However, that didn't make things better. Sometimes I would see a hint of him at get-togethers that revolve around grilling and outdoor dining, life celebrations. We rarely stayed long in the area. Around the neighborhood, we stayed mute unless we were forced to speak by necessity, but I could feel each one's mark, moment on my skin, like a bruise that never completely went away. In my own way, I never wavered in my love for my husband. However, that the pain, the one that forced me to cross the line, has never really gone away. I've only made improvements to the capacity to hide it. There are nights when I'm by myself, wondering if he feels the same sense of isolation, whether he remembers how I held onto the doorframe that first moment to stay steadfast rather than to back off. Now I'm wondering whether he's sorry he ever looked at me like that. I'm wondering if I ought to have looked in that direction, somewhere else, but I can still feel the warmth of his breath, the weight of that first touch, and for a little instant I felt noticed. I admit my error. I know that. But I was also there,